At 19 minutes past 9 a.m. as we continue with news and views with myself, Inayat Wadi. This morning, we stay in the company of our Salam Media listeners, our viewers on the various platforms, on the social media platforms, and also One Nation 88.9 FM out of Polokwane. Wonderful that you are with us now. Still to come on the show, we're going to be unpacking the impact of poor macroeconomic policies in South Africa. We're also doing a analysis on the failure of COPE to address divisions within the party. And we'll be talking with political analyst Dr. Ibrahim Harvey and also taking a look at 100 years of Wits University this morning. But right now, we're going across to be joined by economists Lebohang Pheko, unpacking the impact of poor macroeconomic policies in South Africa. Lebohang, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us. Now, it's clear that at this point in time, we are not in a good space as far as South Africa is concerned, the economy is concerned, and there are many factors we know about the challenges, both external and internal, and South Africa is in a state of economic hardship. But the key issue here is the government. We are talking about policies. We are talking about implementation of policies and also mismanagement.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about mismanagement. We're also talking about a particular decision that was made in the early 1990s as part of the negotiated settlement, which has meant that a redistributive economic approach, which would be less leaning, state-centric, and more distributive, more, socially egalitarian, is not really has not really been built into the DNA of this country. So I think over the last 28 years, we've seen a series of policy experimentation, I think if one could put it that way, which have really veered towards social democratic, strongly right-wing, orthodox neoliberal, and some was, kind of down the middle of a centrist form of economic policy, which is very market friendly, which is intended to distribute through trickle down mechanisms. So the whole hope is that if you have enough foreign direct investment, enough employment, enough multinational companies which are willing to invest in this country, that somehow the benefits of all this will then somehow spontaneously trickle down. You can't really run an economy by hope and by chance. Economies need to be engineered, and that's something that I think the South African polity, and particularly the economic cluster and the thinking heads at the helm of that cluster, don't seem to be able to really grasp. And so, we have a history of these missteps where you have a kind of a social economy in theory, and yet on the other hand, you also have a deeply embedded lack of redistribution, a deeply unequal society. I don't agree with the analysis that says we're the most unequal society in the world. I think that the matrices that are being used are slightly, problematic. But certainly we could be doing far better, especially with the mineral wealth endowment that we have, with the relative strength and stature as a nation that we have. We have the levity to be slightly more autonomous and more independent in our thinking, in our economic thinking, and we have, of course, a vibrant, willing, energetic, talented population, which is ready to make, to make contributions in different sectors of the economy, different sectors of manufacturing, retail, and so on. But just doesn't seem to be happening as smoothly as one would hope.
Well, I like the term you're using, engineered, and in the absence of engineering and without clear direction, this has created this mix that you speak about. It's created a toxic mix, and it does appear that all along we've been clutching at straws, Lebohang.
Mm. So I mean, I think that there's certainly perhaps not only straws but shadows and smoke, really. So the key issues that are affecting the South African economy would be higher unemployment, as we know, social inequity, a weak or very uneven public service access, and that includes weak education, if we count that as a public service, very weak, weak educational infrastructure. So that's both the physical architecture, infrastructure, as well as I think the content infrastructure, the actual curriculum, which I don't think prepares young South Africans to be leaders of our own lives, to be leaders in our own mind, and to really have a strong pan-African, global African outlook as well. And I mean that the health infrastructure, which is very burdened at the moment, especially the public health infrastructure to be specific. So, it's well and good to have a building that calls itself a hospital and a clinic, but if it isn't so, it hasn't got the necessary, bedding, sterilized instruments, where mothers are giving birth on hospital floors, sleeping with babies in cardboard boxes, and that means that there really isn't infrastructure in the way that one would expect. And I think for a country that still prides itself on having some form of middle income status, and again, it's very problematic because the measures and the matrices for these things are sometimes being quite random and themselves quite politicized and steeped in public relations, really. But be that as it may, for a country that is supposedly a middle income country, which has a huge endowment in terms of natural resource reserves and so forth, we should be doing much better.
Lebohang, where have we gone wrong as far as policy implementation go? Because there is this sentiment that is being expressed that the government has wrong macroeconomic policies, economic policies, and this has resulted in South Africa's economic hardship, and also at the same time implementing the wrong things. And we all know about mismanagement and corruption as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that. Okay? So, I mean, there are many things. I mean, some of the issues include low domestic savings. Some people have viewed this as also the result of inadequate levels of foreign direct investment, which goes back to my first hypothesis that suggests that you can't rely on foreign direct investment, and we need to even think through what we mean by investment, my brother and the listeners. And investment is something that should typically yield dividends for yourself, for the country. But, we talk about foreign direct investment when in fact a lot of corporates are being given tax holidays. They don't want to comply with skills transfer obligations and regulations, because we need to have time horizons where companies come here and we are able to mine from the transfer of skills so that we can reproduce what they are doing for ourselves. Many countries do this, and I mean countries which have less, I suppose, leverage than we would imagine that we do, are able to negotiate those sorts of deals for themselves. We also have to rethink the idea of the tax holidays and the unwillingness, I think, for a lot of these companies to comply with labor regulations, to comply with basic environmental requirements. So it's one thing to say that a company is bringing work and is bringing jobs. Jobs are not an investment. The investment is in the skills. The investment is also in future employability. And I think that these are some of the reasons that we have, and we keep complaining. I mean, many people will complain that there's a low skills level. I don't think that it's so much a low skills level as a mid-skill level. And particularly if I take it back to the education system, which in any case was never designed to enable the African majority in this country to be multi-skilled, to be versatile in their aspirations of life. It was really designed to create a cohort of people who can read and write so that they can sign their name on the bottom of a pay slip at the end of the month to a boss. And I think that really we have to be rethinking the way that our fiscal and our monetary policy as well, and the variables that can cause some tension in that regard, how we're able to manage that. The role of the Reserve Bank, for example, in ensuring that we maintain currency sovereignty. So, for example, this means that we have to rethink some of the other factors, like the role of the Reserve Bank the way in which it can help us to structure and restructure and redeploy finances in the key employment sectors in this country, for example. I'm not a great fan of quantitative easing. I don't think we can print your way out of problems. But I do think in the short term, in short bursts, it's potentially a viable option. And then I think the final thing is our this natural resource endowment in gold and in diamonds. There has to be a structural reassessment of how these endowments are being deployed. It can't be that there's a monopoly of a few families, the De Beers and so forth, who own them, who are the ones who are still managing the mineral cartel 28 years after so-called liberation. And it can't be that the prices are set for us by external forces, by external bodies that we don't always, necessarily understand. There certainly should be some kind of some sort of a state-led process of that. And of course, that's always going to be open to accusations and possibilities of corruption, but there has to be a middle ground, because really, for all of these reasons, and then of course going back to the negotiated settlement, this is really the architecture of a failed attempt. I don't think there's ever even been an attempt to build a working class mobility, a working class capacity that is able to sustain itself.
Well, certainly, and also, it requires strong political leadership. And we know the mess that we found ourselves in is as a result of some of the political issues. And despite external factors influencing the direction that the South African economy has gone, and we know with the war in the Ukraine, we know what has happened with COVID-19 and the pandemic. So there have been external factors. But the key issue here is uh, what is within our control. And, you mentioned the beers, you spoke about monopolies. And last night, I had a detailed discussion just looking at monopolies in the retail space. And for example, how food prices have actually gone up as a result of the conflict and COVID-19, but also in terms of coming down. So these monopolies, and again, there has got to be some direction, there has got to be some policy, and all of this at the end of the day requires strong political will and strong political leadership to address these issues.
Which I don't think we have. I don't think we have the sort of political orientation at the moment. I don't think we've ever had the sort of political orientation, because unfortunately, as soon as the ANC came into power, they seem to have completely abandoned any edifice of a this negotiated settlement. It was really buttressed by this combination of ideas and institution building, and I'm not sure whether they were really able to go beyond this competitive politicking in favor of always the win-win situations, right? The win-win outcome. And I think this broad churchism of the ANC has also meant that there's been a lot of upper political, social mobility for the usual suspects, but in a fundamental way, I'm not sure that the ANC per se has been willing or able to really put foot to its social democratic principles, its social democratic principles, especially in the economic sector. And this, I think, is really to do with overly appeasing those settler minorities since 1994. It's also to do with this whole talk left, walk right thing, but these accusations of them through the many iterations of various market-friendly economic policy frameworks, from GEAR to RDP. The RDP wasn't even a policy framework. It was a horribly written set of ideas, but it did at least try to articulate some kind of a sustainable development program. And then soon after that, GEAR came into play. And I think we've been in GEAR ever since. And it's really puzzling. Even Naomi Klein, in her book, in one of her first books, she told No Logo. She also expresses surprise at the way in which the South African economy really was not able to capitalize on the goodwill, the global goodwill that was available to it to set a different trajectory. A lot of people, especially on the left, I mean, she says that she calls it democracy born in chains. And basically, I mean, she expresses surprise that it's basically reconfiguring ongoing forms of oppression. And that South Africa had the opportunity to actually show the world a new deal, a different way, a way that was neither authoritarian, harsh, Soviet style, nor was it going to be a crass capitalist, consumptive, heartless, uninclusive form of an economy. And instead, we've really gone, we've created the very same power elite. We have basically maintained the status quo. And, the inequality between African people and white people in this country is greater than it was before 1994. If that doesn't cause the powers that be and the big wigs in the Tuli House and in Parliament to wake up in a cold sweat, then I don't know where their moral compass is.
Well, certainly, Lebohang, and that obviously raises a lot more questions. And, unfortunately, time is of the essence because there's just so much more that we can unpack in what you've just said in the last 10 minutes or so. But as I said, time is of the essence. But as always, we do appreciate you taking time out, talking to us, and we wish you all the best.
You're welcome. Same to you. Salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Lebohang Pheko joining us this morning. And with that, we're going to go for a break. We come back, we'll be joined by Dr. Ibrahim Harvey.